gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? By Great 78.
Who gives a fuck about an Oxford comma? I've seen those English dramas too. They're cruel. So if there's any other way to spell the word, it's fine with me. With me.
Chapter 12. Name. Draco. Still Saturday, October 16th, 1999. Oxford University, Oxford, England. Malfoy, I realize this cafe likely isn't a Michelin star establishment, but don't you think this particular clothing ensemble is a bit, I don't know, casual for you? Granger eyed him with a mixture of disbelief and what looked like vague amusement. Draco looked down at the Muggle tracksuit that honestly looked and felt more like pajamas than proper clothing on his body. He had broken down and purchased some schlumpy Muggle ensembles, befitting his new personality as a hapless Burke. He had yet to put on the Muggle jeans that Theo had recommended with all of the abysmal pockets and loops. They seemed incredibly heavy and uncomfortable. But this ensemble didn't require a fanatical number of zippers and buttons, at least. This particular kit, however, went against everything he knew about fashion. The itchy fabric felt like the kind of bag that would ordinarily line a Muggle rubbish bin, and the garish blue and gold colours would have been more at home at a Hufflepuff versus Ravenclaw Quidditch match. But he'd seen a photo of Weasley wearing something similar in the pages of Who? Magazine a couple of weeks ago, so he knew it was on point. He'd just wish it hid certain things a bit better. The thin, crinkly fabric, if one had a fast and loose relationship with semantics and wished to call it fabric, was extraordinarily hot. Worse, it fell heavily and clung to everything, meaning that Draco was, advertising more than he'd intended. Not that he had anything to be embarrassed about, but that was actually besides the point. To complete this rarefied ensemble, he'd also purchased a Muggle contraption called a Walkman. The salesman at the electronics shop nearby said it was practically a necessity in this day and age, on the cusp of the new millennium, such as they were. The little red box was attached to one's waistband, held some sort of thin, hard rectangle about the size of a small piece of bread, and had a long bit of twine connecting the box to a sort of half-loop that reminded him of earmuffs. He still had yet to figure out what it did, but when he pressed one of the buttons on the side, the red box at his waist made a great whirring sound, as though it were angry, and so he was content to leave it alone. Still, he wore it on his person because he'd seen Muggle men who wore similar clothing, also wearing these devices, so it seemed that they went together. Granger wore a pair of Muggle jeans, and a Fair Isle jumper that hugged the curves that Draco had seen up close only minutes before. And once again he mentally cursed the awful marquee-like fabric of the suit that revealed any sudden twitches in his trousers. To her comment about his choice in attire, he simply replied, "It's Draco. Remember, Granger? And I thought I might try a new style here in Oxford. You know, some Muggle looks to fit in better with the locals." "And that's what you landed upon?" She sounded sceptical. "It's a work in progress," he answered shortly. Apparently the tracksuit was a failure for Granger as well, which he was immeasurably grateful for. He made plans to incendio the garish awfulness as soon as they returned to the flat. They stepped out of the building into the quiet of Oriel Square. "What are you listening to?" she asked. "Sorry, what?" He cocked an ear, trying to pay attention, to hear what she heard. There was a thrush singing to itself in harmony in a nearby tree, but he had the feeling that that wasn't what she meant. She tried not to laugh. On your Walkman. What are you listening to?"
My what?"
She reached for his waist with both hands, and his eyes grew wide for a moment, until he realized that she was reaching for the little red box. She pressed a button, the one that opened the red box, and withdrew the tiny rectangle from inside. She squinted to read the writing on it. "Is this Mariah Carey? That doesn't seem like your style, Malfoy."
"It's Draco, Granger, and I'm really not sure what you mean. Is it because it's red? Slytherins can own red things, you know." He smirked.
"No, Pratt. It's because I wouldn't have thought you were into power ballads and love songs, but I stand corrected, I suppose," she said, snapping the little red box back together. Then she hesitated. Do you know that this device plays music, right, Malfoy?"
Of course I did,"
Draco answered.
He had not. "And it's Draco."
Apparently, the truth about the music box was written on his face, because she said in a slow and kindly manner, "You see, you just press this button here, and when it stops you can press it again to play the other side of the cassette, see?"
"Of course,"
he answered. He resolved to do this at his earliest convenience. She seemed to be suppressing a giggle, and he fought the embarrassed blush on his cheeks. "So, where is this cafe?" Granger said, looking down King Edward Street to save him a bit of his dignity, for which he was grateful. "I've been so busy with classes since term began, I haven't had much time to explore the town."
"We just take High Street up ahead to Cornmarket, then a left on St. Michael's. It's near the bus station,"
Draco said as they started to walk, offering her his arm, a habit formed from years of etiquette lessons. To his utter surprise, she took it with a playful smile. "You know, we're doing things a bit out of order. Typically, two people would go out to eat before getting naked in a bedroom together. But who has the space in our flat for conventionality?" Granger quipped with a cocked eyebrow and an impish grin. His silver eyes widened as they stared into hers, and he felt himself wobble just a bit. He cursed the gods-awful rubbish-bin trousers once more. If she kept saying things like that to him, whilst looking at him with those warm, copper-coloured eyes that way, these ugly blue and gold trousers were going to start resembling a pitched circus marquee soon. As they walked, he could feel her side brushing up against him, courtesy of the closeness that her hand on his arm provided. The effervescent bubble of elation in the pit of his stomach was hard to ignore. He kept trying to come up with topics of discussion, just so she wouldn't think he was an absolute troll with nothing to say. But he found that he could not hold on to a thought for longer than a few seconds at a time, beyond, "She's here, with me. She's with me. We're going somewhere together. She's agreed to go with me." Each time he thought he had something to say, he would look back at her, and the inner chant would start anew. The next thing she said, however, made him wish that he'd tried harder to steer the conversation. "Malfoy, do you mind if I ask you something?" Granger had asked, looking up at him quickly, a half-smile lighting up her lovely copper eyes.
"It's Draco. And no, of course not. Ask away."
She looked up into his eyes, hers filled with a familiar curiosity, one that he had seen within them in the classes they had shared since they were 11 years old. Granger needed to learn something, he knew. "Why do you insist that I call you by your first name, but you don't extend to me the same courtesy?" He stopped walking so abruptly that, from his side as she continued her pace, she was suddenly pivoted around the fulcrum of his arm to face him.
"What?"
he asked, confused. She tilted her head, looking away from him, as she carefully considered her phrasing. "Well, you've always called me by my last name, same as you always did for Harry and Ron. And I know you called Vince and Greg by their surnames back in school. But you refer to Theo as Theo,
So clearly it's not everyone. So, if you can't extend the courtesy to me, why should I extend it to you?" He shook his head, bewildered. "Granger, I only call my friends by their given names." Granger's jaw tightened as her eyes flashed up at him, more fiercely now. "Precisely. Are we not friends?" He stammered, then swallowed. "I hope to be. I hope that you will consider me to be your friend. One day." Now her brows drew together in confusion. "What do you mean? We've lived together for over a year now. Of course we're friends." "We are?" he asked earnestly, struck dumb by the sentiment. "Truly?" Her expression was one of complete disbelief. "Did you think we were still enemies, Malfoy?" "No!" he answered quickly, shaking his head dumbly. The fingers of her right hand were still caught in the crook of his left arm, and as though it had a mind of its own, his right hand came up to cup her left elbow, so that they were in a near embrace. He said more softly, "No, I don't want to be enemies with you, Granger. I've had a lot of time to think about things over the last couple of years. Looking back, a large part of me never did want that, I think." "So why do you still insist upon calling me Granger instead of Hermione?" she asked, sucking in her bottom lip to catch between her teeth. His hand curled around the back of her elbow, running the pads of his fingers back and forth over the nubbles of knit in the jumper. He swallowed, then looked up, his earnest silver eyes trained on hers. "In pure-blood society, wizards refer to other people by last names, as a way of keeping them at arm's length. Someone in a superior position, or someone beneath you, it doesn't matter. It is used as a way of separating you from them, their family from yours." She nodded. "It's sometimes used that way in the Muggle world, as well." The thing is, in wizarding pure-blood tradition, you generally must ask, or be asked, to use first names. It would be highly inappropriate, improper for me to take that liberty with you until until I have your permission." She still seemed flummoxed. "What do you mean?" He inhaled deeply, breathing in her sweet gardenia scent that floated to him in the cool October air. "I've only ever called a few people by their given names, Granger. I keep suggesting that you call me Draco, in the hopes that one day you will offer the same to me." A slow smile crept across her face, and to Draco's heart it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. You want to call me Hermione?" His eyes widened, and his breathing grew slightly laboured. He had not expected her to dangle this level of intimacy in front of him so flippantly, as though it were a simple matter, a triviality. In truth, the tradition ran even deeper than what he'd told her. Yes, a wizard might eventually find themselves in a close enough friendship with another wizard that they might go by given names with each other. But aside from blood relatives, it was nearly unheard of for a wizard to refer to a witch by her first name, unless they were betrothed. There truly had been only 3 people in the world that he had ever addressed by their first names, besides his elves. Theo was of course one of his oldest friends, even though they'd grown apart in Voldemort's height of power. Then there had been Randolph Urquhart, a Slytherin chaser only a year behind them, to whom he'd grown quite close during the terrifying ordeal that was his 7th year, Rand's 6th year. And finally, a distant Malfoy cousin in France, Madeleine. Despite only seeing each other at summers and winter holidays, they had been the best of friends as children, having been the only Malfoy children in their generation.
They'd spent countless days playing together on the beaches in France, having snowball fights in Austria, or sailing in the Mediterranean. But when Lucius was imprisoned in 1996, after the Ministry break-in, his cousin, Madeleine's father, decided to distance himself from Lucius's family. Draco had not heard from Madeleine in years, and Rand had died in the Battle of Hogwarts. Theo, essentially the only person left in Draco's life with whom he was able to take such liberties, had given him a blueprint for winning Granger's heart, and Draco was possibly about to fuck it all up badly by blithely skipping through several of the proper steps of etiquette, as though they meant nothing. But, on the other hand, Theo himself called her Hermione at times, and he'd told Draco to relax and loosen up around Granger. Draco was frozen in indecision. What would Weasley do? It's a long name and whatnot. But yeah, if you want me to," he responded, aiming for nonchalance, but falling decidedly short. Granger's eyes seemed to dim only slightly, before she smiled even wider. "That would be brilliant, if you would call me Hermione, Draco." His heart felt fit to burst as he smiled hugely. His fingers pulled slightly at her elbow, and just for a moment he worried that he might lower his lips to hers and kiss her. It was far too soon for that. She would likely push him down onto the pavement and hex him until his privates shriveled and fell off. He had little doubt. He released her reluctantly. "All right, Hermione." The word sounded foreign on his tongue, and something about it felt a wee bit off, but the sheer fact that she'd allowed it made him want to weep in happiness. "Come on, let's go," she said with an amused smile, pulling at his arm to get him moving again. "There might be a line at the door, or a wait for a table, and I'm starving." Draco laughed. "Are you a witch or not, Hermione? Skipping lines and finding open tables where there are none is one of the best perks of wizardry." She laughed, tugging his arm harder and walking more briskly. "Come on, Pratt. It's Draco." He was pleased to see how much she enjoyed the cafe. Just as he had hoped, they offered a wide variety of eclairs. In addition to chocolate and coffee, strawberry and vanilla cream, they also had Nutella and speculoos. Sitting in the cool late October morning, surrounded by strangers, Draco worked to calm his nerves. They had never been anywhere alone together, certainly not in public. In 8th year, if they happened to dine at the same time in the great hall back in Hogwarts, she had always sat with the Gryffindors. Even here, if they ate in the great hall, they were usually accompanied by Theo. What would they talk about? But looking at her, sitting opposite him, somehow put him at ease. It reminded him of their evening talks, both here at Oxford and at Hogwarts, and before long they had fallen into an easy discussion. At first the topics were normal, their current and past classes, their years at Hogwarts. Then the topic had turned to the upcoming event of Halloween, and he'd learned more about her childhood, which sounded fascinating. "So, when you were 6, you were a fairy, but not a real fairy?" he asked, tilting his head in confusion. Granger laughed. "No, a pretend fairy. Her name was Tinkerbell. I didn't look anything like a real fairy, thank goodness. Those are quite frightful. My mother was Peter Pan, and my father was Captain Hook. He was quite dashing. He was a pirate." "I thought your father was some sort of healer. Something about teeth or eyes?" he asked, perplexed. She laughed harder. "No, Draco. I mean for Halloween. To celebrate, Muggles usually put on fancy dress cozies and pretend to be someone else for the night." The idea intrigued him. He would file this information away for later and come back to it. For now, he could see a far-away look in her eye.
My father was a dentist." A nervous palpitation ran through Draco's blood at her change in verb tense. Until this moment, he had not thought much of Granger's parents. What had happened to them in the war? Remembering the countless lists of targets that had been circulated amongst Voldemort's army, a sick feeling grew in his stomach, entirely separate from the cloying, sugary sweetness of the eclairs. He swallowed hard and lowered his mug of coffee. "Hermione, your parents, are they—"
"No, they're all right. They're fine," she said through a thin smile. "I did what I needed to do to keep them safe." The words offered him small comfort, but her expression was still forlorn. He had no idea what it was that she had done, but clearly the decision had not been made lightly. "I'm glad. That was the best thing you could do. They would have been in grave danger otherwise." Looking into his eyes, she could see the unwavering truth in his words there. She nodded slightly, her lips thinned into a narrow line. Yes, it was for the best. He took a deep breath. "And now, are they still in England?" Granger blinked rapidly, bringing her napkin up lightning quick to dab at the corners of her eye, as one tear threatened to escape. She cleared her throat. Yes, they're back here now. Before our 7th year, I used a memory charm to make them forget all about magic. All about me." Draco's eyes widened, but he said nothing. He could tell that this was hard for her to say. "Before our 8th year, I restored their memories, and they agreed to return with me from Australia. But they were quite angry with me. They still are." His face was a mask of confusion as he shook his head. "Why? They're alive, aren't they?" She nodded. "The thing was, I wasn't sure if they would leave England. No, scratch that. I knew they wouldn't leave. I asked them to go. I tried to explain the dangers they faced until I was blue in the face, but they didn't believe me. They kept saying that they were fine, that I was overstating the danger, that no one was after them, which was a complete lie." He ground out. Startled, she looked up then, seeing the unfortunate and regretful truth in the set of his jaw. "They would not have been safe," Draco said shortly, but did not elaborate. He did not wish to dredge up memories in either of their minds of how their world had been only 2 years before, and of his place in that world. After a moment she nodded and said, "Thank you." His bark of laughter at her unexpected appreciation was so loud that it drew the notice of the muggles seated next to them. He cast a nonverbal muffliato, then lowered his voice to speak again. "Granger, I can't think of any possible reason why you feel the need to thank me for anything. To be honest, the fact that you aren't cursing me about this should be the most surprising." She gave him a wistful smile. "It's Hermione, remember? And yes, I do have a reason to thank you. You see, for years now, I've worried for so long that I made a mistake back then, making them leave the way I did. I erased their memories. I took away their free will. It might not have been an unforgivable curse, but it was still a powerful and malicious one. I worried for a long time that I'd gone too far, but it was the only way I could think of that would guarantee their safety, that I could be certain that they would leave and not try to come back for me." He swallowed and nodded. "It was a good decision. The right decision." "You're the first person to tell me that." Her face suddenly crumpled with pained emotion, and he quickly withdrew a fresh handkerchief from the pocket of the rubbish-bin trousers to offer her. She accepted it gratefully. "Everyone else either says nothing about it and tries to pretend it didn't happen, or else they make me feel like a horrible person for having done it. You're the first person to say it was
a good decision." He nodded. "Believe me, it was. If they had been in the country, they would have been... well, you know." Everyone in the British wizarding world had read the articles, seen the lists, heard the stories of the dead and missing over the last 2 years. She took a deep breath and gave him a watery but genuine smile. "Enough about all that. It can't be changed, and it's in the past." He nodded and moved the conversation back to the autumn term and their classes at Oxford. They finished their final bites, both of them occasionally looking up at the other and exchanging a nervous smile. Just as they were preparing to depart, from the little outdoor cafe table, a friendly voice called out from behind them. "Hermione, is that you?" Granger turned, non-verbally cancelling the muffliato. She greeted a trim woman with long, straight auburn hair. The Muggle woman was wearing something that Draco supposed was fashionable for Muggles, even though he truly had no idea, as was clearly evidenced by his own ensemble. The woman was clad in an enormous jumper belted over a pair of dark green trousers so tight that they clung to her legs like a second skin. Over these she wore a pair of high-heeled brown boots. "Amelia! Great to see you. Draco. Do you remember Amelia from our criminal law class?" Granger asked. Draco looked more closely at the woman Granger had called Amelia, then shifted his eyes away quickly from her intense, interested gaze. He did remember her now. She sat behind him and 1 row up during their criminal law seminar. Draco sometimes found it difficult to concentrate during the class because he seemed constantly to feel eyes upon him. The handful of times that he'd chanced to glance backwards to see who it was, her hazel eyes had met his with interest. It was unnerving, shades of being the reluctant housemate of a 12-foot-long snake at one point in his life. After a handful of classes, it was obvious that it wasn't just his imagination. The woman easily spent half their class time undressing him with her eyes. He froze in indecision for a moment, trying to think of what Weasley would do. He had already tried flirting in front of Granger with Violet, with spectacular results, in the sense that her hackles had been well and truly ruffled. But he was hesitant to do so now. For one, he and Granger had made such headway this morning, getting past the whole surname versus given name business. And for another, frankly, he was a bit scared of this Muggle woman. In addition to staring at him throughout class, there had been a couple of times when she'd passed behind him as he stood between the stacks in the library, pressing her body against his to pass, even though there had been plenty of space in the aisle. Another time, across the great hall in Christchurch, she had performed some kind of lewd gesture with her tongue at him. So, instead of greeting her cordially, or turning on that old Malfoy charm, he opted for another tried and true Weasley technique. Rudeness. "Yeah, hey," he said, grabbing up the silver earmuff things attached to the Talkman and clapping them down firmly over his ears. He pressed the button that Granger had indicated, and was immediately assaulted by high-pitched, loud screeches directly in his ears. He startled, ripping off the offensive muffs. Now, at a distance, the screech sounded more like an actual voice. Granger stared at him, wide-eyed, then subtly waved a hand towards his waist, out of sight of the Muggle woman. Immediately the sound lowered to become more tolerable. Hesitantly he replaced the muffs on his ears. That was better. Granger had been right. This was not the kind of music he cared for, but at least it wasn't trying to make his brain bleed anymore. He resolved to ask her for Muggle musical advice as soon as possible. In the meantime, he had accomplished his mission. The Muggle woman seemed taken aback by his discourtesy, but said nothing, at least not where he could hear it, over the music.
The two women spoke to each other for a few minutes, each with occasional glances towards Draco. Then Granger waved goodbye as Amelia departed. She looked at him, and through the noise emitting from the earmuffs, Draco could barely make out her words. "Are you ready to go?" He stood. "Yes, let's go." Granger laughed and reached up to the silver earmuffs, removing them carefully and resting the loop back round his neck. "Are you all right? What was that about?" Draco glanced up, noticing the Muggle woman, Amelia, still standing there on the pavement several feet away, watching them. Granger turned, following the direction of his eyes. When she turned back to look at Draco, the witch's expression was shuttered. "Ready?" she asked, tight-lipped. He nodded, offering his arm once more. This time she pretended not to see it, stuffing her hands in the back pockets of her Muggle jeans. "So, you were right. This isn't really my taste in music," Draco said, gesturing to the red Talkman at his waist as they began to walk. Granger only hummed noncommittally. I understand. It's always a good idea to listen to a bunch of different things, see what you like." But her words sounded clipped, as though she was suddenly in a bad mood. He started to ask what was wrong, but she continued, without waiting for his response. "You know, my gym isn't too far from here. I might go for a workout. Going to work off some of those eclairs," she said, walking so quickly that Draco had to pick up the pace to keep up with her. The infernal rubbish bin trousers made an awful swish, swish, swish sound now that grated on his eardrums nearly as bad as the Talkman had. "Do Muggles typically work out in knit jumpers and those kinds of trousers?" Draco asked skeptically. He had seen the clothes she ordinarily wore to work out in. Salazar helped him. The attire left little to the imagination, and drove him mad every time he saw her. This ensemble, whilst adorable, was decidedly not that. "I'll transfigure my clothes," she said shortly. "Why don't you head back to the flat? I'll see you later." Without waiting for his response, she turned swiftly and set off down a side street, without looking back. He was left wondering exactly where he had gone wrong with her. He gave her a moment, looking in the windows of a few nearby shops. When she was halfway down the block, he followed at a distance, casting a notice-me-not charm on himself, so that if she did happen to turn back, she likely would not see him. True to her word, she pulled open a glass door belonging to a gym that Draco had passed a time or two. He sighed to himself, wondering what had happened to sour her mood. In his mind, as he walked, he idly played back the last half-hour or so. Their conversation whilst eating had been lively, easy, in a way that it had not been on their walk, much like it had been across the table in the eighth-year common room. It had been a wonderful experience, right up until Amelia had appeared. Then Draco had dipped out of the discussion, and something had changed. He wished he had been paying better attention. He was lost in thought as he walked, realizing after a moment that he was approaching a music shop. He ducked inside, finding row upon row of small rectangular boxes, much like the one inside of his Talkman. The selection overwhelmed him, and he turned and exited the shop in a matter of a few minutes. Perhaps he could get Granger to come back with him some day. Now, he was passing the Muggle gym into which Granger had disappeared. His notice-me-not charm was still in place, he saw, as he passed the glass front window. His reflection, ordinarily crisp and clear, was much fainter than usual, the outline of it wavy and blurry. Feeling like some kind of creep, he peered inside, searching for her. Granger had transfigured her clothing, and was on some sort of running device, her legs churning quickly to keep up a frantic pace. The look on her face was intense, and if Draco had to place an emotion with it, it would have been a toss-up between anger and longing. She was staring at something across the room. Draco followed her eyes, finding someone, a Muggle man, wearing only a pair of short trousers and Muggle trainers. He appeared to be straining with a very heavy set of weights, grunting with exertion as his various muscles flexed in effort. The man was sweaty and focused on his workout, but did not seem to mind the bit of attention he was getting from Granger and the other 2 women working out nearby. In the wavering reflection of the window, Draco could see his own expression go from open and curious to jealous in an instant. He seethed silently, hands balled up into fists of envy. With a deep sigh, he turned away from the window, turning onto Cornmarket to walk back to the flat. After a block or so, he grew impatient, stewing in his feelings of loss. For a brief bit of time, he'd felt like he was making headway with this witch. After all, they were on a first-name basis now. And though he had made her cry about her parents, she did seem genuinely happy to hear his words about her decision to send them away for the duration of the war being the right one. But it appeared to be 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Turning into a Muggle hamburger restaurant, he threaded through the early lunch crowd to the toilets in the back. Closing himself inside one of the empty stalls, he spun on the spot and disapparated back to their flat. Apparently, Draco's thoughts were still preoccupied by Granger because his apparition was a bit off. He landed precariously balanced atop the tiny coffee table instead of on the floor, as he'd planned. He slipped and slid sideways, stepping into a bowl of brown, mushy something that looked to be growing fur. In absolute disgust, he picked up his foot and flung the sticky bowl towards the kitchenette. It released from his Muggle trainer with a rancid squelch, and he lowered his goo-covered shoe back to the coffee table. His foot now landed upon an open bag of crisps, which was, unsurprisingly, slippery. His arms pinwheeled as he tried to catch himself unsuccessfully, landing in a heap upon the tiny sofa where he ordinarily slept. The various piles of clothing balanced atop the sofa immediately fell in upon him, burying him. He sat there for a moment, defeated. He had time to think to himself that at least his only saving grace had been that no one else had witnessed this. But then a voice broke the stillness. "Mr. Malfoy, I cannot tell you how glad I am that I was here to see that. Now, if you're quite done making a spectacle of yourself, perhaps you have a moment to chat." The deep, measured tones of Kingsley Shacklebolt filled the tiny sitting room, echoing off the piles of clean and dirty laundry, the discarded orange and banana peels, and Draco's eardrums, all with equal disdain.
Thank you for listening to Who Gives a Fuck About an Oxford Comma by Great78. If you enjoyed this story and would like to listen to more, please follow me on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for Silver and Copper. Or you can find me under Great78 on Archive of Our Own.